I would say the most important thing I had to do is learn to love and forgive myself, because what goes on inside of us is just going to be a reflection of what's going on outside of us. So if I'm holding grudges or angry at something outside of me, that means that I haven't truly forgiven myself for something. So the inner work was the starting point for me, and I think it would be the starting point for anyone. Once I had gone down that path far enough and had, been able to forgive and obviously modify my actions according to what I had learned, then I got to a point where it's like, all I need to do is just embody these principles, and I don't need to hold a grudge against any of these.
In this episode today, we have my guest, David Greenberg. David is a multimedia artist, singer-songwriter, and occultist. And if you're like, ooh, occultist, that's so like devilish, occultist simply means the studier of some things hidden. He is the founder and creator of FreedomVibe.art, a private media platform dedicated to teaching knowledge about the occult and specifically about natural law and the spiritual laws which govern the consequences of human behavior. I am so excited to have him on the show to dive into some potential sovereign strategies for you to explore that may have been hidden or occult to you. Stay tuned. Before we dive in, let me tell you about the book that started a podcasting revolution, Make Every Podcast Want You. It is not just a bestseller, it is a 2-time gold medalist, baby. This book is your ultimate guide to landing dream podcast interviews, building authority authentically, and making your voice the one they remember. If you've got a message and a mission, this is your mic drop moment. Grab your copy today in the link below and step into the spotlight that you were born for. Welcome to the Crown Yourself podcast, where together we build your empire and transform your subconscious stories about what's possible for your business, body, and life. I'm your host, Kimberly Spencer, founder of CrownYourself.com, and I'm a master mindset coach, best-selling author, TEDx speaker, known to my clients as a game changer. Each week, you get the conscious leadership strategies you need to help you reign with courage, clarity, and confidence so that you too can make the income and impact you deserve. Imagine this podcast as your royal invitation to step into your full potential and reign in your divine purpose. Your sovereignty starts here, and your reign is now. David, what does sovereignty mean to you?
Great question to start off, Kimberly, and thanks for having me on the podcast too. I appreciate that. Yes, sovereignty is really our natural state, but it's not something that is automatic. Sovereignty, what it means is that you are the master of yourself, right? You are your own king or queen.
Mm-hmm.
You rule yourself. And of course, that has certain consequences, meaning you accept responsibility, just like a king or a queen from a dominion would accept responsibility, for their subjects, right? So it really boils down to self-ownership and rule of self.
I mean, I know for me, like the concept of sovereignty and leadership was foreign, like absolutely foreign, because I grew up in this belief system that I was a victim and that I was damaged and that I was broken and that I needed to ascribe to certain systems and boxes. And I just never felt like those were designed for me. And it wasn't until I started really understanding, for me, NLP, that was the gateway drug, of understanding the power that we have over our own mind and our own thoughts, that unlocked everything for me. So what was it that unlocked you finding the path to self-leadership? Did you always have it?
Yeah, I think on one hand, I pretty much remember my whole life, I never really fully bought into this idea that people can rule over each other, or that there is some kind of hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So I would kind of go along with it at some certain times in my life, because I hadn't really activated enough courage, or self-determination to really step into that. But deep in my mind, I never believed it. So I think I've always my whole life kind of been ready for that knowledge to kind of come to the forefront. But of course, there were progressive things that happened in my life and also in the world around me that for me, it was just like layers of awakening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I too, I had that same sort of feeling. Like I would try to buy into the system. Like this doesn't really fit. Like
Yeah.
for me, when it was like, oh, you just, go from high school and you graduate and you go to college. And I was like, this doesn't make sense for like my path as to what I want to do. So why is like, that was the first thing among other medical things where I was like, this doesn't make sense. And that really started to open the doors to how much power we really have. And I know that you said in some of your videos, like the distractions of the world and the matrix that we live in. What do you find are the most common distractions that are kind of plaguing society at this moment?
Yeah, well, the biggest distraction of all is just anything that keeps your attention outside of yourself, because ultimately the answers lie within us. And the most important work we have to do is go within and figure ourselves out, right? No one can do that for you. So in a way, it's like all the distractions are the same. They're just keeping your eye on what's going on out there. And the talking heads and the politics and the entertainment, they're just different flavors of the same distraction. But ultimately, they're so desperate. When I say they, I mean, we can get into who they are, but, simply put, they know how it all works. So they are occultists. They're very good at manipulating reality. And what they're specifically good at is psychology, so that they keep us all very distracted. And of course, the net result of that is we never have the time, between surviving, paying the bills, and being entertained. We never find the time to actually go within and really take a closer look at ourselves and what's actually going on.
And you said a great buzzword that I know for some in my audience is gonna be very activating: occultist. So can you explain what the occult is and what it isn't?
Sure. The occult is a very important and very large body of science that is, and I would say some arts as well, that is largely hidden. That's why it's called the occult, because occult comes from the Latin occultare, which is a verb that means to hide or to conceal, right? And it ultimately comes from the Latin noun oculus, which is the eye. So think of it as like
seeing eye
from the eye, right? So the occult is a very large body. It encompasses what we call natural law. It encompasses pretty much the psycho-spiritual laws that are largely hidden. They're not really taught in any mainstream education, but they're operating. And if you know about them, then, if you know about them and someone doesn't, then there's a power differential. And that's exactly what's going on here. There's a power differential because certain people, we can call them occultists, know this knowledge. They have this knowledge, and I say when they have it, it's you can spend a lifetime studying it.
Yeah.
But they go into it, and I consider myself an occultist, but I'm more of a light occultist because I'm not weaponizing this knowledge. I'm trying to get it out there to more people,
right? And spreading the information.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are so-called dark occultists. That's kind of the opposite of a light worker. A dark occultist is someone who knows how reality works at a much deeper level than the average person, and they specifically weaponize that.
There's a great movie out called Wish that my children are big fans of. Yeah. And I was very surprised at it because it does talk about magic and sorcery and the studying the magic of the world, and the sorcerer, not to be a total spoiler, but the sorcerer turns out to be a bad guy because he's kind of like hanging on to everybody's heartfelt wish and not letting them pursue it on their own. And people are willingly giving their sovereignty to this leader. And I was like, damn, Disney, that is some, you are sharing like the light and the dark. And I think we see this a lot in films because it is like right in front of our nose, except for so many of us think that, it's easy to see it, and we see it in a film. We don't think, oh, we have that light within us. And yet we do. And when we understand natural law and how that works, and there's one thing that my kids keep saying that I said, what's the lesson of this movie, kids? And they're like, never mess with dark magic. So just understanding what that darkness is, and when you use natural law or you manipulate it to lord over other people, that's manipulation. So how do you use it for light? And what are the natural laws that you find that you gravitate toward most, that you love most?
Well, ultimately, the principles of the way reality works are generally very simple, in the sense that as you discover them, the foundational principles are always very simple and elegant. And I think, and just to go back to what you said about the movies, almost all great film and television series is allegorical, in the sense that it's revealing a lot of very powerful knowledge. And sometimes I'm shocked when I'm watching even old shows, but also new shows and new films. I'm kind of shocked at some of the phrases in a good way. I'm kind of pleasantly surprised at what some of the characters are saying, because sometimes they just come right out and share these very deeply occulted secrets that you'll never get anywhere else. And, there's probably reasons why the occultists hide them in films, but don't necessarily teach them in elementary school, for example. But if we're paying attention, you can learn a lot of powerful knowledge from film. As far as my favorites, that's hard to say. I would say that the Hermetic principles resonates a lot with me. I think it's one of the most elegant ways to describe how reality works. It's a set of 7 principles that just describe reality at a very fundamental level. So you have mentalism. I think mentalism was my favorite discovery, that we live in a mental universe, because once I realized that, everything in life made so much more sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and the holographic universe.
My favorite. Yeah.
Like that experience of perception is projection, and the mental universe. And one of the things that I think has given me the most power over the years of just over myself and over becoming a creator of my circumstances has been the basic principle of that which is unconscious, that which is conscious manifests happily, and that which is unconscious manifests unhappily. And so when you see something in your environment or in your world and in the mental realm of you, and it manifests unhappily, then you get to look at what is unconscious. So you shift it, heal it, alchemize it, and transform it ultimately.
Yeah, and we are reality co-creators. So what's going on is, it's just like you said, if we're creating consciously, then we are choosing the outcomes that we want to create together. But if you're creating unconsciously, you're going to be creating either way. We are essentially reality co-creators, whether we consciously aware of that or not. This universe is a mental projection. It comes all from the mind of the creator, and then the small mind is the individual mind, but it's an analogous process. That's the principle of correspondence. That things work the same way at every scale of reality. So yeah, I mean, part of it is taking back the reins of the reign is in the word sovereign. Taking back the reign of control of your own mind, which is really all that you can control. But when you do control your own mind, you start to take control of the outcomes that you are creating, because your actions are going to create certain outcomes. So you stop being a victim, like we talked about at the beginning. You stop being a victim and thinking that you're just being made to do all these things, and you start to empower yourself. And as more and more people do this, we can't even imagine the type of reality. It's hard to imagine. It's not impossible, but it's almost unimaginable based on where we are right now, how much of a better reality we could be in when all of us, the same people that are already here, the same crowd, suddenly takes back our sovereignty and starts to consciously co-create. We could literally create a paradise that we could scarcely imagine.
I completely agree. How do you practice this in your own life? Like, to bring it down to a tangible day-to-day practice?
So the first step is, just taking ownership of my mind and my thoughts. And when I slip up, because we all make mistakes, we all slip up, we don't want to beat ourselves up for that, but we also want to take responsibility. So I just keep running everything I do through a filter of, am I making the best choice here? And if I make a mistake, what can I learn from that mistake quickly so that I don't go back and keep making the mistake? And, and obviously forgiveness is important when you make a mistake. Again, you don't want to beat yourself up. So I've stopped beating myself up for my mistakes, but I try to, recognize, I try to, recover from a mistake very quickly, and make adjustments very quickly. So I'm just very conscious and conscientious of everything that I do. And it doesn't mean that I suddenly, perform much slower. It may sound like, oh, so now I have to put everything through a filter, but like, I'm not going to be able to, take fast action. That's not necessarily the case, because you can get really good at this. It's just, I just make sure that I put everything through a filter and ask myself better questions. And I never blame anything outside of myself, even when it seems like circumstances outside of myself. And this happened even this week. A few things happened out and about. And initially I'm like, I could see myself trying to blame that outside person or whatever, but no, it all came from me. And I could even trace it back to the root of it.
Yeah. It's such a powerful thing when you can trace it back to the root of a belief, of an issue, anything that activates you, anything, or as many people would say, triggers you. When you're able to notice those inside of you, that's where you suddenly, that's where the spaces, those triggers are your teachers. They're not meant to just be this projected blame in the world. They are meant to teach us a lesson about ourselves that then we can then transform and alchemize within us, so that we shift our own mental reality.
Yeah, and actually things start to get better when you start to take that responsibility. I mean, it's not all drudgery. Doesn't have to only be pain and struggle. It actually, you start to open up the magic, because you're like, okay, I just need to learn that lesson, and then you learn it and apply it, and you make a shift, and things just almost instantly start to get better. And so it has a positive feedback loop.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The feedback is pretty instantaneous. Like, as soon as you make the pivots and have the awareness first. But it is a lot in today's world, like you said, like with the distractions of, there's businesses that we're running, there's, dogs and kids and homes and taxes and all of the things that impact, that can be wonderful, loving, amazing distractions. But also, I like to look at for me as a mother, I look at my kids as my greatest teachers. Like, I've worked with some great coaches, but damn, my kids are my greatest teachers, because they are mirrors of me, and in so many ways. And I see something reflected in them, and I'm like, oh, that's in me. I see that. And so being able to do that simultaneous co-creative healing, and also healing generationally, it's transformative. But in the process of, that awareness and that making that mistake, as a former recovering professional flogger, someone who is incredibly hard on herself, you are in, the teaching, you teach the consciousness of sales. And so when you're in the space of that which is typically an industry that's very go-gettery, high achievement based, and there can be a lot of mistakes. What mistakes did you need to allow yourself the most grace on?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely enrolled people in a sales context that they weren't a good fit for whatever I was selling them. So I didn't do the best by them, and that's happened, a number of times. So that was like a big lesson of forgiveness, but also, I needed to learn the lesson of, that's not the true purpose of sales. Yes, we want to all exchange values, and yes, we want to thrive and prosper and have great outcomes and conduct business. These are all great things, but we don't enroll people, or we don't sell something to someone if it's not going to really serve them. So that I had to be pretty straight with myself and say, that's not acceptable. And even if other people can get away with it, I'm not going to participate in anything that's going to be manipulative or deceptive or self-serving, in the sense that I'm going to do whatever I can to get that sale, even if it's not necessarily the best outcome for that and for the client or the buyer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's where sales gets to be really spiritual in a way.
Yep.
You know, even though sales takes place on the physical plane, like the principles of natural law that play into sales are so powerful. So can you expand on how sales can become a really spiritual, beautifully fulfilling process? Because I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs in our audience who, many of which don't like making sales because it can feel, the way that it's been promoted in the past has been feeling gross and you take advantage and manipulative. But how can we do it from a place that's really deeply centered, where we know that it's going to be of the highest and best for both parties involved, creating win-win solutions?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is get good with whatever it is you're selling. Make sure that you're selling a product or service that is totally in alignment and is not out of alignment. You know, there are degrees of that. I mean, something could be completely out of alignment and just be completely based on a deception and just, you know, not of any benefit at all. And then you have like gradations where it's, you know, more and more beneficial. So I would say before anything else, get yourself on the side of offering a product or service that's really can have a profound positive benefit. Because when you do that, everything else will follow naturally from that. And that's essentially the natural selling methodology. That's the foundational principle of the natural sales methodology that I'm now teaching, is that start with, make sure your purpose is aligned. Right.
And how do you
do that? All the rest is gonna fall in place.
So when checking in with your purpose, is it just that your skill set is at a mastery level? Is it making sure that it's a part of your dharma? What are the different gradients to check and make sure that it's fully in alignment, so that you feel comfortable, good, whole, and like you're, you know, growing other humans as you sell this product or service?
Yeah, well, nobody can tell you what your purpose is but you. You know, don't believe any of the gurus or experts who come along and say, I can tell you. I've had people literally try to say to me, oh, I can, you know, that's not your purpose. You know, they try to correct me. And I see through that very quickly now. I may have fallen for it when I was, you know, before I went through all this, but only you have to do some self-discovery. It goes back to that idea of, you know, looking within, and when you hit upon it, it's going to resonate at a deeper level. So for me, for example, just to use an example, for me, when I discovered that my purpose is to serve as a catalyst to create more freedom in the world, like I knew that I had hit on something that, you know, is very core. And I knew that all I had to do was to start to align the rest of my actions and my, you know, dealings in the world to line up with that purpose. So whether it's business or sales or education, which is obviously I do a lot of educating, I just needed to keep making sure that all the things that I'm doing keep lining up and keep moving me and you know, myself in my path, along that path, to create more of that outcome in the world. And as long as I was doing that, I knew that I was on the right path.
And I know a lot of people think that they have freedom, and many of them say they want more. I mean, I can't tell you a client that hasn't come to me for my coaching business saying that they, you know, they want more freedom in their life, in their business, etc. What does it mean to actually have more freedom?
Yep. Well, the first thing to understand, I think, is that freedom is not free. This is a paradox. Life is full of paradoxes, and freedom is not free. And the cost of freedom, or the price we pay, is to be moral. So morality and freedom are like two sides of the same coin. And that's why this understanding of objective morality, which is tied in with natural law, is so important, right? And the reason is because morality is three things. And the first part of morality is self-responsibility, right? So if you want to be free, the first thing you have to do is say, I'm always responsible for the consequences of what I do. And I can never shift that responsibility to anyone, neither to politicians, to police officers, to soldiers, to doctors. I can never actually delegate my responsibility to anyone, not even to parents or loved ones, right? So that's the first part. The second part of morality, of course, is we don't harm anyone. We don't cause harm or loss or injury. We don't steal things that don't belong to us. We don't deceive people. We don't try to make people do things that they don't really want to do. So it's the outward facing reflection of that freedom, right? Because I'm going to give to everyone else the same gift that I want back. And then the third aspect of morality, of course, is that we stand up for ourselves and we don't let people walk all over us or take our, harm us, cause us, injury, loss, or take things away from us that they have no right to, right? Because we have to stand up for ourselves. So when we embody those three aspects of morality, that's when we are free, because now there's mutual respect. And if someone comes along and tries to disrupt that, there is a mechanism in place to put a stop to that, because people will stand up for themselves and they won't let that. Just like the body will defend itself against disease, and the optimally healthy body will not really suffer because it's in this optimal state. So humanity as an organism, we will experience more freedom. And the way we experience that, of course, is just we can experience more of what life has to offer. And we have far fewer restrictions as a society. That's the external manifestation of freedom. But the internal is, of course, in the mind, when you know that you're free because you are responsible.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
That's right.
So the responsibility, ownership is our number one core value, bar none, self-responsibility and self-leadership. And it's the thing that's not taught and preached and learned really in school. Like, we kind of learn leadership, but not really. How do we practice self-leadership on a day-to-day basis? Like, what did it start to look like when you started out on your journey? What did it start to look like for you as far as self-leadership, self-ownership?
Yeah, once I started, of course, it starts with the educational aspect and learning these principles and dedicating yourself to learning them so that you can express them even to yourself. Once I started to understand these principles, then it just becomes a matter of, in my case, creating this filter where everything I do goes through that filter. And if I decide to deviate from whatever path I've decided to, like, I make a conscious choice. And sometimes it's just a vice. Like, I might say, I'm going to indulge in something. I'm not actually harming anyone outside of myself, but I'm going to indulge. I'll indulge knowing that there's probably a consequence to that. But I'm taking that responsibility. But certainly when it comes to other people, I would say the biggest change is just every time I see another person, I recognize that is a sovereign being, even if they don't fully realize it. Right? And if they don't fully realize it, all I have to do is, depending on how they interact with me, I just need to keep reflecting that back to them, because I've already embodied it inside myself.
Yeah.
So, they may say something that sounds like, oh, they don't really believe that they are responsible for themselves. So I might challenge that in some way. Not necessarily in a harsh way, but I might, this is where the leadership comes in, because the leader keeps pointing them back to the truth. So I might ask them a question like, is that really true? They might say something, there's nothing I can do about, these taxes or whatever, these bills, there's nothing I can do about it. Is that really true? Is that really true? Or could there be another way of looking at all this? And that's kind of the door opener to get them thinking, just, shake them up a little bit. And then that could provoke a conversation where I can, as the leader, I, or the person who's in that leadership role, can start to share ideas in an empowering way. Because it's always about empowerment.
I remember the first conversation I had with my women's health advisor as I was thinking of getting pregnant, and I was with my first child, and she was one of my clients as a Pilates instructor back in the day, and she kept on asking me questions. It's like, oh, like, have you thought about where you're going to give birth? And I was like, that's a hospital, right? Like, that's where everyone gives birth. And she said, okay. She goes, I've just delivered, for 25 years, babies at home, but that there are other options. You don't have to. And I was like, that's interesting. So it was constantly this awakening of curiosity and allowing for the sovereignty of choice and truly freedom of choice versus here's your options. These are the only options that you have. And I saw such a profound difference in the two types of care that I chose to go with midwives and have my children at a birthing center. And then the second one was at home. And profound radical difference, but it came with the power of knowledge. And because someone was kind enough to guide me and lead me with presenting me with options, so I really truly had the freedom to choose instead of what I was conditionally accepting because of society.
Yeah, that's great. And I love how they presented that in a they weren't trying to control the outcome or get you to choose even a way that they considered to be superior. They were simply planting the seeds of an idea, in your mind and allowing you to decide what you want to do with that.
If you're listening to this interview thinking, I want to do that, I want to be on more podcasts, I want to share my brilliance with the world, then I have got the service for you. It is called Podmatch. Think of it like Bumble, but for podcasting. This AI-powered platform matches you with the right podcast host so you can pitch less and get booked more. I've used it to land aligned interviews that amplified my voice and built my brand. It is literally one of the few services I recommend in my best-selling award-winning book, Make Every Podcast Want You. Sign up now at podmatch.com in the link below. And I think that's the role of coaching, like whether it's sales coaching or leadership coaching. Like ultimately, the coach creates options. Like that's the job of a coach, is to expand the possibilities of options. It's not to tell somebody what to do. And I think what I've seen in the coaching industry specifically is that there's a lot more of the latter, which creates a person losing their sovereignty, believing that they need to be working with a coach or somebody in order to grow their business, when ultimately all the answers are inside of you. And I love what you said in the beginning about that principle. How do we walk the line between having guides and receiving support or mentorship or coaching that guides us versus receiving support and guides that we give away our power to and deflect as being the authority or the smarter person?
Yeah, I mean, that's a delicate point, because there is a lot of there are unsavory characters, and there are even coaches that will gaslight you. Unfortunately, I've seen this firsthand.
I've seen it too.
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate. And again, that could fall on a continuum. There could be very manipulative, even narcissistic, or to the extreme level people. It's like the wolf in sheep's clothing. And then you have a continuum, and that people maybe have generally good intentions, but they still they've learned manipulative behaviors, so they haven't fully taken responsibility. And then you have people who are kind of on the good side. So part of the job, with the principle of self-defense, we've got to put everything through a filter. And we've, ultimately, again, because we're responsible, like when we're choosing a leader or a teacher, I mean, ultimately we're the one choosing, right? So you don't need a teacher, but having a teacher can be a good idea, because there's so much to learn that sometimes, I'm very grateful for the teachers that I've learned from, because they've helped me to shortcut a lot of things. I don't put them up on a pedestal. Some of them I haven't necessarily even paid money to. Others I have. So I think ultimately you just have to figure out what it is what kind of knowledge or what kind of help you most need, and who you already know or who you can kind of draw to you that's going to best fit that. And you're going to know, because they're going to have a public facing content. For example, in today's modern world, every coach or every teacher generally has some kind of public facing content or material So you're going to be able to vet that, and then you just decide, like, yeah, this is someone I want to learn from, right? But
100%.
you shouldn't get a coach just because, everybody needs a coach. I'm not necessarily, I don't necessarily.
I don't know how to, I'm a coach and I don't ascribe to that belief system, because I think, we can have mentors for certain times in our lives, for certain seasons and for certain reasons. For me, I chose this year to take a complete break from any sort of general life, high performance evolution coaching, to really practice listening to my intuition and self-leadership. And I have of course, I'm presented with some specific options, like a sales coach and for us, a Pinterest strategist that I've have come into my space. And that, when I look at that, my gut was like, yes, I feel like those are very specific, aligned things with it in that are targeted in a way that we're growing. So those are a fit for that particular reason. But I'm not looking for someone who's broad, all encompassing, because I do think then I heard a really great Hebrew teacher years like a decade ago, and it always stuck with me because I grew up very fundamentalist Christian. And the first commandment of the 10 commandments, with thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, is less about, instead of saying, damn it and all that, it's more about, taking on the persona of somebody who is guiding and leading in spirituality and in growth in the spiritual realm, and then being that wolf in sheep's clothing and being that manipulative person and being that narcissist. And I know you've studied Hebrew deeply. How do you find that those lessons kind of play into what it is that you're doing now and the objective morality in business and sales?
Well, I grew up Jewish. So we'd studied, I was in Israel for a few years and I studied Hebrew. And I don't really speak Hebrew fluently anymore, but there was a point where I was pretty fluent in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew. And by extension, I could read a lot of the ancient Hebrew texts. I think that was, that was like 30 years ago. So I think I may have lost the opportunity to go deeper into what I was learning. But looking back now, the example you gave, I think, is perfect. If we look at the 10 Commandments, if we look at certain passages, all of religion is allegorical, whether we're talking Judaism or Christianity. If we're talking about the texts like the Bible or the Quran, like there's an esoteric meaning, and that's where I think like you talked about being fundamentalist, and I think the Orthodox Jews is kind of the Jewish version of fundamentalism, and I've hung out with a lot of them. They get so caught up in the literal aspect of it, and
versus the esoteric,
right? And there is always an esoteric level, right?
In fact, I would venture to say that there's multiple, depending upon the level of consciousness that you're reading it at.
For sure. There's always an allegory. And so these things, and I think when these religions were constructed, and they definitely were constructed, they didn't just organically develop. Probably those who constructed them were, in order to make them more powerful, were embedding these deep spiritual truths in them, but then they kind of covered them up with a lot of the stuff that makes them more like candy. For someone who's not really tuned into the deeper level, but is just going to go along with, say, the more literal definitions or more literal interpretations. So that's probably an area that I could go back and delve into more. But I definitely try to, whether it's the Hebrew traditions or any traditions, I'm not opposed to learning from any of them. If someone were to come up to me and say, let's look together at the Quran, I would be like, let's do it. Let's see what we can learn from it. That's part of being an occultist, is we don't close down the door to any knowledge, but we don't just automatically believe things either. It's like we're trying to gain actual knowledge and understanding. And we also recognize, like I always recognize, there's always going to be another layer. There's always going to be another layer. There's always going to be another level of truth that I could discover within whatever it is I'm doing. I tend to be more audiovisual, so a lot of the way I consume knowledge is through video.
Yeah.
Video, film, television shows, YouTube videos, things like that. But I also respect and do read and respect, being able to gain knowledge through the written word as well.
I love the visual medium, and you're speaking of YouTube. I mean, your YouTube videos are just so beautifully. I love the artwork in them. I think that the way that you describe certain concepts and belief systems is really magical. Like, you have a way with words and descriptions and kind of pairing everything together. What I'm curious about is, so many people have, I'm just gonna say, an internal representation, to use NLP language, of occult, and that it's bad, and that it's dark, and that it's and because it does mean hidden from the eye. But how do you find, when you come out as an occultist, and that it's received, that people are people interested, or people afraid of you?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is a small percentage, I would say, that are afraid, or that it shuts down the conversation, or appears to. And I understand why that's happening, because again, the true dark occultists, why would they want people to start to uncover the method behind their madness, the method of their operation? Like, why, just like if I'm a master thief and I'm planning a great heist, I don't want someone to discover my plan.
Yeah.
Why would I want to do that? But on the other hand, they also, there's a paradox there too, because occultists, because they know that natural law is a thing, they know that free will is a thing, so they can't truly usurp free will. So they kind of have to give away what they're doing, but they do it in a very encrypted way.
Mm-hmm.
That's why everything is hidden in allegory and films and stuff, as opposed to them just coming out and saying, this is what we're doing. Right? I think there's fear. People are afraid of darkness. They're afraid to recognize that there is such thing as evil, and that evil is an actual manifested, there is an actual manifestation to evil, and it's something that we should, be ready, recognize, and be willing to confront it.
Would you say that's like an egregore?
The way I define evil is it's just, intentional causing of harm.
Mm-hmm.
Just to keep it really simple. It's like when people actually want to harm others, and that's their intention, and they will do it through any, whatever means, like either directly or through manipulation. They want to enslave people by getting them to believe certain things, which then limit their power. It doesn't always have to be, murdering people or, physical violence. I mean, that's part of it, of course, but it can also just be manipulating people to give up their power. So that they essentially become slaves.
Oof. Yeah. That manipulation is very apparent. It's something that, I think more people are becoming aware too, of seeing how things may not have, existing systems may not have their highest and best good at heart. And I think the interesting fact is, the interesting piece is, though, most, from what I've seen, and I just take this from my background in film or in any sort of writing, like, when you write a bad guy, the bad guy isn't like cool, like twiddling their thumbs and like being maniacal and like that, like that's, like Dr. Evil, right? The bad, like that's satire, versus like when anybody, like, writing a bad guy, ultimately the bad guy thinks that they're doing it in the name of the greater good.
Well, they consider themselves the opposer. That's the embodiment of the opposer, which is what Satan actually means. Satan, coming from the Hebrew shatan, which means the opposer or the adversary. So there are people, and it is a religious belief, just like, people, those of us who have more of a positive belief, there are people who believe that their purpose in life is to harm people, or to cause harm, or to get people to harm themselves, because that's their, that's their highest embodiment. Right? It's hard to believe, but for them, it's a religion.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe at the very deepest levels, if we go really deep into it, they believe that they're here to serve a divine plan by serving as opposition, because you could almost look at it from a universal perspective. If there is no opposition, then there's no learning.
That is true.
So that's why I don't have any hard feelings towards any dark occultists or any of these narcissist manipulators. I won't let them take advantage of me. And if I was confronting someone on a one-on-one level, I would certainly, put a barrier up and stop them from any specific harm to me. But I don't hold any grudges. I don't, talk badly about them or anything. I just, I choose the team of good, right? But I recognize that they have a place in reality. Like they have a right to exist as much as we do. The only thing they don't have a right to do is to trample over our rights.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if we need to learn to do that because of what they do, then that's the way we're going to learn it.
And I think you brought up such an important principle that without resistance, we don't learn anything. And as the light has become more apparent in the world and more apparent to more people, so has the dark, and things just seem to get worse. And you're like, what the heck? Like even as there's the light, so there is that paradox and that dichotomy. So my question, though, is how did you learn the level of forgiveness, or is it acceptance, that allows you to still hold people who wish harm on others in a space of love?
I would say the most important thing I had to do is learn to love and forgive myself, because what goes on inside of us is just going to be a reflection of what's going on outside of us. So if I'm holding grudges or angry at something outside of me, that means that I haven't truly forgiven myself for something, right? I haven't truly embodied that. So the inner work was the starting point for me, and I think it would be the starting point for anyone. And then once I got to a certain point, because it's an ongoing journey. I mean, it's not like one and done, or, there is no arrival point. But once I had gone down that path far enough and had, been able to forgive and obviously modify my actions according to what I had learned, then I got to a point where it's like, all I need to do is just embody these principles, and I don't need to hold a grudge against any of these. Now, again, that doesn't mean we're allowing behaviors to occur. If you happen to specifically know that there is someone in your neighborhood who you even think might be causing harm to a child in any context,
No way.
and you need to get your ass over there and confront that, right? You yourself, either by yourself or together with others, because obviously if we can work together to address these things. You don't necessarily have to do it individually, but you can't just sit on that and say, oh, I can't do anything about that. Even if they could open up a potential dangerous situation because someone is being harmed, right? And you know about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's why the local context is where we start. We can think about all the bad things that are going on in the whole world, but if something's happening locally, that's where we start.
Yeah.
That's where we start to take action.
I love that, because I think I used to live in Australia, and currently in Australia, they're having a huge domestic violence issue with violence against women. And I see someone who I have deeply loved, a mentor of mine. She came on my podcast not too long ago, and Anna Rose, and she has been just vehemently beating the drum on a local level for the country of Australia, standing up for women and the fact that there is so much violence going on towards women. And I so deeply admire that, because I agree with you. It does have to start on that local level, even local in terms of just your family, like being aware of the relations that you're having. I mean, when I think the do no harm principle, when you do harm and you recognize that there was harm created, how do you go about righting that?
Yep. Well, in common law, we have this idea of you always have to act in proportion. So if you're defending yourself and you break someone's arm because you're stopping them from attacking you, that's okay. Like that's already in balance. Mm-hmm. But if you somehow cause harm and there was no, it wasn't say, shall we say, justified in any way. There wasn't any reason, proportion to do that. Obviously, we can never undo what has already happened. So what we try to do in that case is we approach, let's say it was an individual, we would approach that harm party and we would just say, I recognize that I caused you harm. Like, I recognized you caused you harm, and I'd like to work with you to try to address this, if you're okay with that. You're not even just asking them for forgiveness. You're just saying, I recognize that I caused harm. If they want to forgive you, that's up to them. I recognize I caused you harm. I would like to find out a way to restore the balance in this equation. Can we do that? And I think if you approach people with a very genuine desire to rectify, then they would be, they'd probably be very surprised, because I don't think a lot of people do that. But I think naturally, if they have, if they're just naturally vibing in a good way, they'd be like, sure, you did cause me harm. And yes, I would appreciate it if we could, come up with a way to address that.
I think that's where self-responsibility comes into play anyways, because having been someone who's had those conversations, not obviously intentionally, but if something accidentally happened, like maybe we slipped on a client delivery or something like that, and I was like, oh my gosh, then that's something that we get to have that conversation and rectify, because even if it wasn't done intentionally, if there was harm done, then that allows for that balance to come back into play. I think that the challenge with that is so many people these days are perceiving when they are triggered or activated with something inside of them as if that is a harm. If they are feeling insecure, or if they're feeling angry about something, that they feel like the other person is doing harm. And so then it creates a relationship of blame, typically from the quote unquote injured party, because of the triggered emotion. Now, is that harm, or is that a conversation more about self-responsibility?
Someone feeling bad or offended, that's not actual harm. It doesn't mean we don't address that. But the truth is, sometimes people need to be offended, because when you're offended, what that means is you were offended by something that may be true and you just didn't want to face it. So I think we don't want to conflate that. So when I talk about a harm, so going back to objective morality, harm is usually one of 7 things. You murdered someone, which means you wrongfully stole their life when you had no right to do that. You assaulted them, which means you harmed them in their body. You raped them, which means you took away their right to decide with whom to associate sexually. You stole some of their property. You trespassed on their private abode or on their rights, because you can also trespass on people's rights. You coerced them to do something, you coerced them or attempted to coerce them under some threat to do something that they didn't really want to do, or you deceived them by giving them bad information, which then caused them to make the wrong choice because you gave them the wrong information intentionally. So those are really the only 7 ways that you can actually harm someone. So if someone feels offended, like if they were offended because you tried to actually cause harm, I mean, that's, that wouldn't be offended. They would maybe, they would say they would be threatened.
Yeah. Or righteous anger from, oh, you tried to deceive me and I found out that you weren't telling me the whole truth.
Yeah. So that wouldn't necessarily be offended. They would probably feel threatened, anger, maybe some fear, depending on the level of threat. But, you could recognize that you put the person in that situation if that's what happened. If you bullied someone, you can recognize that you've basically committed some kind of psychological violence against them, right? Versus just saying something that is true that they didn't want to hear, but they got offended. That's very different.
And I think that's because sometimes, the truth shall set you free. It's one of my favorite quotes from Ted Lasso. The therapist says to Ted, the truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off. And so often, there are things that I haven't wanted to see within myself, and that I know that when I point it out to my clients, I literally pre-frame it and say, I have a feeling that what I'm about to say is going to radically piss you off. Yeah. Unfortunately, though, in pre-framing, you in essence get the other party's permission
Yep.
which is a coaching technique in order to say, hey, I'm going to say something and it's probably going to piss you off. Are you okay with me saying this? Oh, well, what is it? Well, if they say that, then that is, you have permission to say it. So it does allow for that permission-based selling of the thing that may activate something, but it may, in that space of activation, I love that you pointed out that so often that can highlight something that's within themselves that they get to heal, because that's where the self-responsibility comes into play.
Yep. And I would say that when you ask for permission, it's not even just a technique, it's you acknowledging their free will, right? And trying to make it as fair as possible so that they have the option to either opt in or out of whatever's coming next.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's the honoring of that sacred free will is so powerful. I mean, imagine if everybody did that, imagine if politicians did that in conversations. That would be amazing. So let's switch gears, because I'm really curious as to how do you sell so naturally so that you are honoring these laws?
Yeah. So what the main way that I'm selling is, I'm an educator, as we've talked about, and so a lot of, a large part of what I do is educational material. So in the business context, I've just brought that into the business context. So that what I do is I do a lot of workshops, and the workshops are very interactive, very engaging, and I just teach from a principles-driven perspective. I teach these foundational principles with respect to sales and business, the way that I embody them, and the way that I think that if someone embodies them in their own way, they're going to get the most outcome. So I'm just selling them in a way on the value of these concepts. And then, of course, we workshop it so that it becomes, not just theoretical. It's like, here's some practical examples, so they can actually see what it looks like in practice. So that's the main way that I sell this approach. And then then that allows them the workshop attendees to experience it. So they're learning, they're experiencing it, they're practicing it, they get to it, and then they start to embody it, and they can, at some point, they see the value. And if they, of their own choice, if they say, well, I want to work more closely with David because I want to, master this at an even deeper level than I could, just through the workshops, then they would say, I'd love to have a call with you. Can we kind of go into this in a deeper level? And that's kind of what opens the door to the one-on-one coaching or mentorship. But they've already, because I've already, exposed them to so much of it, knowing that not everybody's going to be my client, but I still want to help as many people as possible. So it's to the mutual benefit. Now,
I know you are practicing this as well in your new venture, conditional acceptance. Can you tell us more about what conditional acceptance means?
Yeah, so I'm actually pretty enthusiastic about this new project. It is brand new. So conditional acceptance is a term that comes from common law contracts. So we've been talking a lot about natural law, and the great thing about common law is it's just it's just man's expression of natural law put into some practical language that's, easy to understand and can be passed on basically as an oral tradition. It doesn't even really need to be written down because it's fairly simple. So in common law, we have this idea that everything we're doing, because we have free will, we have these mutual contracts. And the way a contract is formed is you have someone makes an offer, and then someone accepts that offer in some way or form. And there's different ways to accept. There's outright acceptance, which is basically unconditional acceptance. Yep, I'll take you up on that, right? Then you have acquiescence, whereas you don't do anything or say anything, so you're just accepting it, by default in a way, like tacit acceptance. And then you have what's called conditional acceptance. And the idea behind conditional acceptance is you're accepting their offer, but you're setting the conditions, right? And it's so powerful because unlike a dispute where you're just, saying, no, I won't take you up on that, there is no dispute, right? You're saying, I'll accept that. Sure, I'll accept your offer to pay that fine as long as you prove to me that I owe you that money. right? If you can prove in the following way that I actually owe you a debt under all the following conditions, then sure, I'll happily pay that, right? But if you can't prove that, you agree that you've tried to defraud me of money that I actually don't owe you, and instead you owe me $1 million in fines and penalties, for example, right? So you're taking back all the power. And the other thing that's very powerful is there's no need to go to court. It's not about lawsuits. Like in fact, we want to stay out of the courts because the courts is their game.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's some disagreement around this, and there are other folks in this space who are very heavy into filing lawsuits, and that's okay. But what's very powerful about this is because it's happening at the common law level, which is basically comes straight from natural law. It's like it's a reflection of natural law. So it's above our sovereignty because natural law is above our sovereignty. So no man can come along and say, I have a higher authority than this common law or natural law. So the beautiful thing about conditional acceptance is it's basically a tool where we start to take back our power and take back our rights in many different contexts, especially in the world of commerce, banking, finance, credit, but also government, because government essentially is also a commercial endeavor now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's been restructured over the last 150 years, and now it's in the United States, at least. I think it's in Canada and other countries as well.
Mm-hmm.
It is basically a commercial enterprise, a for-profit private corporation, right? And which is making offers, and most people are just accepting them because they think that it's the law, but they're just offers. So when we start to conditionally accept those offers, then we take back our power.
Can you give us an example of one specifically?
So let's say a debt collector, like a third-party debt collector, sends you a collection letter, right? The problem there is, well, we could dive into the specifics of it, but in general, the problem is that you have no contract with them. Because in order for you to owe them a debt, there has to be a valid contract with full disclosure. It has to be a valid contract, mutual consent, and full disclosure with no deception. None of those things exist. So there is no contract. And because there is no contract, there can be no debt, because all debts are contracts, right? So they're basically coming along and fraudulently claiming that you owe them money when no such thing exists, right? So when you conditionally accept their offer, so you receive a letter and they're going to craft the letter in a certain way. I mean, when you start to go deep in this, you can just tear that letter apart, word for word. And basically the gist of it is you send them back a contract in common law, which they sign for because it's sent by a certified mail, and you notarize it. So it's a sworn statement, right? And you're basically saying, I've received your offer to pay a debt. I conditionally accept your offer. There's no dispute here. We don't need to go to court. I conditionally accept your offer as long as you can prove to me that we have a contract, that an individual in your company signed and I signed, because contracts are signed by individuals, not by corporations. So it's been mutually signed, which means it was mutually consent, full disclosure of terms, and there's consideration. That's another thing I forgot to mention. All debts have consideration. All loans have consideration. Consideration means all parties offered up something of value. But in order for there to be a debt, there needs to be something of value. So if I come to you, Kimberly, and I say, I want to buy your house and I'll give you 100 gold coins for your house. You're offering the house, which is real property, and I'm offering you 100 gold coins, which is real property. So we're both offering consideration. So it's perfectly valid to have an exchange, right? The company is coming along and saying, you owe a debt, which is Federal Reserve notes, which is not even real money. And I get into that in the workshops. So if people want to come dive into this deeper, that's just currency. That's a promise to pay. It's called a negotiable instrument. You've probably heard it said that, US dollars, it's all just debt.
Yeah.
Well, it's true, because they're all negotiable instruments. It's just evidences of a debt, of a future potential payment. Like I promise in the future to pay you a certain amount of money, but it hasn't been paid. It's just a promissory note. And every dollar bill is a promissory note. So this company is coming along and fraudulently claiming that you owe them a debt when you don't. Right? And they're probably harassing you and maybe even threatening you. So you conditionally accept their offer and you say, great, I'll pay this debt as long as you prove to me that you haven't tried to defraud me by claiming that a contract exists when it doesn't. And if you can't, you agree to pay these penalties, which are obviously going to be way more than what they're asking you for, probably millions of dollars. And oh, by the way, you give me your power of attorney that if you don't pay me those penalties, I'm just going to lien your property with a commercial lien. Right. And I'll just, once I place a commercial lien on your property, you won't be able to do anything until you resolve the debt that you owe me now. Right. So you've completely taken back all of your power. And that, could provoke them to negotiate. Like maybe they'll just back down. Mm-hmm. Right. Or they may do nothing because because a lot of people aren't educated, even in these corporations. They don't really know that what they're doing is wrong. So they're kind of, even the CEO of some of these debt collection companies, they may or may not even know, the extent of how much trouble they can get into if somebody conditionally accepts their offer. But they're going to learn very quickly.
Mm.
Right.
This is, it's revolutionary stuff that you're sharing. Yeah. And I know that there is a question that has been in the back of my mind or in other, that I know is in the back of some of our audience listeners' minds, is how is this legal? Like, and it's just legal because it's common law.
Well, not only that, it's actually legal because it is a correct interpretation of all the statutes and commercial law as well. So for example, I'll give you an example. When you use a credit card, by law, by their statutes, their commercial statutes, you're manufacturing promissory notes. And promissory notes, which are negotiable instruments, can be collateralized as securities, and they are. Right? And essentially, when you open up a credit card account, you are giving the trustees of that bank, the individuals, you're giving them permission to take credits out of your, to borrow against the credits of your Social Security account, which has plenty of funds in it to cover all the costs, right? A typical Social Security account probably has $100 million in it, right? So you're the creditor. You're the creditor and the bank is the borrower. They're borrowing against your credits and they have the right to earn on that, so they can earn interest by trading those securities, but ultimately you're the creditor and they need to, they owe you the interest back on what they've borrowed from you and not the other way around. And that's by law. That's how the UCC works. This is all straight out of the Uniform Commercial Code, negotiable instruments. I mean, that's how the banking system is actually implemented. So it's 100% lawful and legal. It's legal in the sense that it follows their rules. It's lawful in the sense that nobody's being harmed as long as we all follow the rules. And it's moral, as long as people aren't trying to deceive each other. So they're by deceiving us, they're the ones that are acting immorally, but we haven't taken responsibility to learn how it works. Because most people, they just get a credit card bill and they're like, oh, I got to pay my bill. Like, people don't even think about how it actually works. They don't explain it. So that's where they're wrong. But where we're wrong is we don't take the time to study this.
Well, it's like basic finances isn't even taught in schools. So like and whatever reasons you have as to why that is, but I just know that that's one of the reasons we are homeschooling, with a very clear lesson in finances and in understanding money and what is money, and which is a great book by Michael Saylor, and just understanding what money is, what currency is, what debt is, and not only the energetics of it, but the principles beyond it.
Yeah, by the way, slavery is legal, but it's not lawful.
Mm-hmm.
Slavery is legal, and we are slaves now because we are debt slaves. Because we're acting in an inverted way with respect to how finances work. So slavery is legal. If you follow the law, the law meaning, commercial law will basically enforce debt slavery, but under common law, it's unlawful. You cannot induce someone into debt slavery. It's completely unlawful because you're causing harm.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a very important distinction. When someone say, "Is that legal?" A lot of times, things that are legal are immoral.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore unlawful because nothing immoral would ever stand in common law. So that's what's so powerful about learning common law.
That is a powerful note to end on. And so for more information on common law, go to one of David's workshops in conditional acceptance and just begin educating yourself in your own sovereign rights and the power that you actually have. And and that way you can choose. You can choose, just like when we had Carrie Lynn on speaking about cryptocurrency and what real crypto and like how to navigate with that. Then, you can choose what system you want to be a part of. And there is a lot of personal responsibility that is required. But when you have that, you can have personal responsibility. You have freedom.
That's right. Would you like me to share the website, or I don't know if you'll...
Well, we will leave that the website in the description. It's conditionalacceptance.com.
Yeah.
And, David, I have loved this conversation so much, and all the ways in which we navigated natural law, common law, and all like sales, spirituality. We got the roster, but so I want to dive into a little bit of rapid fire to wrap this up. You down?
Sure. Sounds
okay.
Great.
Who is your favorite character in a book or a movie, and why?
I think I could only answer that in a relative sense, like who's been a recent favorite of mine. And I would have to say Dale Cooper from Twin Peaks, which is a 1990 television show by David Lynch that I've watched recently. There's just something about that character that strikes me the right way.
What person, alive or alive and in their time, would you want to trade places with to live in their body, see how they thought? Who would that be?
Maybe John F. Kennedy. There seemed to be a lot of really interesting and powerful things going on in that time period.
Yeah, I'd be very
curious to see through his eyes and see what I would decide to do.
Yeah. What is your money routine?
Learning as much as I can about it.
That's a good answer. What is your morning routine to set you up for success?
Yep. So I never wake up with an alarm, but I usually wake up fairly early, because I try to get to bed early, and I always start my day with coffee. Always
delightful.
Always.
What is your evening routine to set you up for a successful morning?
So I set a limit that I don't want to be connected too late, even if I'm not like super sleepy. So I usually wind down. I do take a little magnesium that helps me to ease into it. And I maybe curl up either with a book or, listen to a podcast, and I get myself in bed by like 10:30 usually. So that I'm going to fall asleep in a reasonable time. Yeah.
What do you define to be your kingdom?
More than anything, it's my own mind. Going back to what we've talked about during this whole podcast, like ultimately my kingdom is my mind. And it may extend to some things outside of me, but it's my mind and then my body, which is, my dominion.
And lastly, how do you crown yourself?
By loving myself.
Beautiful answer. Like, just being able to love yourself is just so powerful. And I am so grateful that you came on the show and we got to learn so much and covered so much ground. Aside from conditionalacceptance.com, where can our listeners find you?
Yep. So Freedom Vibe, which is the project, the videos that you watched, I'm on YouTube as FreedomVibe.art, these YouTube usernames. So that's where you can find a lot of my work. And I also will be providing links to my other projects from there. So that's, if people want to watch these videos, But I'm on most social media. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. If you search for me there, I'm on Facebook. I'm not so much on Instagram. So I would say YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn are the main spots. And then FreedomVibe.art is the Freedom Vibe website. You mentioned the other one, conditionalacceptance.com. Those are the two main websites where you can find the bulk of my work.
Amazing, David. Thank you so much for being on the show. And as always, my fellow sovereigns, own your throne, mind your business, because your reign is now.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If what you heard resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and start creating a bigger impact now by sharing this with a friend. Just by doing that one simple act of kindness, you are creating a royal ripple to support more people in their sovereignty. And if you're not already following on social media, connect with me everywhere at crownyourself.now for more inspiration. I am so excited to connect with you in the next episode. And in the meantime, go out there and create a body, business, and life that rules. Because today, you crown yourself.